So it's 9 o'clock. Carla, if there's nobody else in the waiting room, we'll go ahead and get started. All three of our chairs are here. Our interpreters are here. I see Nancy and Alicia. And I'm going to turn it over to the chairs to discuss the report, and then we will call on each reporter individually to ask any question that they have with a quick follow-up. Okay, so Mayor Johnson, I'll kick it off to you.
Well, good morning to all who have assembled. Thank you for coming. What you have received is a result, a culmination of about 8 months of work, 6 months of active engagement with our 21 commissioners and a significant number of community players as we delved into looking at structural issues in this community that tend to support racial disparities and inequities and injustices. This work is comprehensive, almost 300 pages of information. Let me stipulate right up front that there may be areas that people felt should have been covered that are not covered. We were constrained by our design. We had 9 groups. We had 6 months. And we entered this work clearly understanding that what we were doing was beginning a process, not bringing a process to conclusion. The body of this work is found in its recommendations and its priorities. So if you are focused on the sections between pages 31 and 69, you will clearly understand the focus that came out of the deliberations of these 9 working groups. For us, we have already presented these findings to the mayor and the county executive. We've had 2 separate meetings with them, first to present the report to them, to give them time to assess it. And then just 2 days ago, they met with the commission where each of the working groups presented their work in summation and responded to any questions that the mayor and the county executive had. From here, the important work begins, the work of implementation, the work of bringing the larger community into this discussion, the work of getting people to recognize and appreciate that we do have a racial problem here in our community, as we have in this country. Rochester is not in this boat by itself. The entire country is. And it is a time of reckoning, a time of action. We were very deliberate in titling this report that it's a time for action. We can't fall into finding excuses for why something cannot be done. Now the burden is on all of us to figure out ways to make things happen, to make things better, to end these disparities, to end the inequities that have been baked into our system for generations. And so I'm encouraged by that. I know my co-chairs will speak to that point. I'm extremely encouraged that we are at this point in time. And if we need any reminders of why this work is important, it continues to come in the daily news, the news out of Atlanta that happened just 2 nights ago, the killing of Asian Americans. And we can even see the kind of response that came out of that. Was it a hate crime? Was it a racial crime? I think those answers are obvious. I think what is less obvious is to get people to acknowledge it, to see what is in front of their faces, and to have an understanding that when these trends continue to be repeated over and over and over again that you can't escape the logical conclusion that these are acts that are born out of racial hatred, and it becomes urgent for our entire community to address these and to isolate those people who continue to persist in this kind of behavior. So let me stop there because we want to use the balance this time to answer your questions. And let me just say right up front that today is not your only opportunity to ask any questions of us. We know that this is a lengthy report, and I'm certain that you didn't have time to read and digest its entire contents. We remain accessible to you, the co-chairs, to answer any specific questions, as are members of the commission, the 21 commissioners themselves, who can really speak to their reports. And so we'll set up that process so that, you know, if you don't already have a way of contacting them, that you can. Our goal is not to obscure the findings of this report, but to spread light on them, to ensure that more people are educated and informed, so that that will be the basis for action. So let me stop right there and see if, and pass it to Arlene Santiago, one of our other co-chairs, and then followed by Dr. Shafiq.
So Bill, I think you captured the sentiment from my perspective in terms of what the purpose of today was. You know, I would reinforce your statement with respect to how we hope the report is used to go forward, and how the city and, you know, the county executive look for means and opportunities to implement them and engage further on them, and to ensure that there's collaboration between multiple groups in our community to bring these recommendations forward. And, you know, I have no doubt that there'll be improvements to some of these, but we definitely look forward to that engagement process, because we really think this is the kickoff point of all the work that, you know, the 160 or so volunteers put into this, as well as the commissioners and the co-chairs and the staff that was involved in that. With that, I'll pass it on to Dr. Shafiq in case he has any other comments. Dr. Shafiq, you are mute.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bill Johnson and Arlene Santiago, for your comments. I want to give a little bit deep down into what these reports are about. I think you know that other cities also had commissions, especially on two issues: mental health, addiction services, as well as on police reforms. This report is very different, as Mayor alluded to it. Mayor Bill Johnson said, this is like diagnosing the whole body of the human being, where the disease is, where the problem is. So these 9 reports is looking into, it's not only to make police reforms or mental health. There are issues attached to it. So the 9 groups recommendations are interconnected. There is intersectionality. And I want to take some, maybe 2 or 3 issues. There are some which doesn't need money to spend. It's easy to bring those changes. For example, all 9 groups have said the cultural competency. I want to a little bit give you some idea what is this issue of cultural competency. If you look into the history, 3 things are there. One is how in the history of the Western history especially, how men and colored people were regarded. Were they full citizens? How they were viewed throughout the history up to the civil rights movement. So you think that also, what is the mentality and from where it is coming? Second thing is that in our education system, we are wrestling with this in the colleges, is based on Western history, Western civilization. Like other civilization, other continents like Latinos, African-American, Asian continents does not exist. That's why you see today it going from one segment of humanity to another segment of humanity. It was Islamophobia, it was anti-Semitism, it was now Asians, others, one after another. What's wrong with us? Then you look to other areas that, as I said to you, those who graduated, they graduated mostly, there was no cultural competency taught in the colleges earlier. Now, the universities are trying to do that. So anyway, what I'm coming to is that first thing is training and cultural competency. It's not spending a lot of money. I think it's not only police department which needs to be trained. One other thing which I have seen, the police training goes on law enforcement. In other words, you must enforce, don't look. In other words, there is no humane understanding in the police training. I got that when I was training the clergy, those who work for the prison system, I came to know that how there is misunderstanding between the law enforcement in the prison system and correctional facilities and those who are spiritual leaders there. See, that is very important, humane understanding while you are there to work with humanity, which we see in the training of the police and other law enforcement, that humane understanding is not there. So I think, this is something which is very important. We did it for the schools, and you can see the school teachers, how now they understand, most of them, who has been through that training, understand religious, cultural, ethnic, and racial understanding to a great extent. Now, this needs to be continuous training of cultural competency for all segments, for all working force. It's not only about police, all working force, cultural competency should happen. Doesn't, to bring further reform and civil services and others may require time, may need money. Maybe we need to go to Albany. Here we don't need to go. We can do it by ourselves without spending money. So that's one thing. I don't want to take more of that. Then there is, and there is no interconnectedness between different working forces which we offer to our community throughout the county and the city. That interconnectedness is very essential, that all working places are interconnected and they serve together. For example, I want to give you something. There is this suggestion which has come, community health center. It means also that not only to have healthcare, mental health, and addiction services all in one place, but it also means to have some, to have a local community skilled people appointed in different areas. Now, not here, but this would not need a lot of money to do that. You see, now we have urgent care, others, both Strong and the two hospitals, Rochester General, have these urgent cares in different places. How we can do that together to make it community health centers, to have skilled mentors there also from the local community there. So before any emergency occurs, that could be arrested before that. In other words, the treatment can happen and it would not lead us to what happened in our city and the rest of the. So anyway, these are suggestions which I was diagnosing. If you look deep into the report, there is a lot to be there. Then you can see that there is discriminatory practice, especially in criminal justice, how the colored people are treated, especially the African American. I remember one time, a good friends of mine, we were sitting together at the African American think tank, and myself was there and some others. And one of the African scholars said, Shafiq, it is good. Now the immigrants, especially those who are professional, who came to America, they were making money. They didn't think about what is happening to the African American and Latino community here. Now they are, this is the time after 9/11. They are, in other words, he said, this is very important to know. When African American goes to a store, he is watched. What? He is watched, or she is watched. Now, a brown color goes to a store, he or she is watched. Maybe there is a bomb there in their body. Look at this. What is happening in our societies and what we are thinking and how our mindset is. So anyway, there is there is a lot about discriminatory practices that you can see in the court system, even in the police mentality and others which are there. One other thing, I don't want to take more time, but I want to bring it to your attention that quite a few groups said there needs to be accountability. Community experts should be there to look into different departments, how they are functioning, how they are doing the work. That is something also that we can think about it, how things could happen. So I can close it there and see how the question goes, because you may have seen the report, but it's the recommendations which Mayor Bill Johnson mentioned from page 3169, actually there are some which we have derived from there. Actually, you need to go to the reports, which go, it's pretty much in detail, give you quite a bit of insight how to cure the disease. There is the disease. It's disease, how to cure that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shafiq.
Candace, can I add one quick point?
I think the interpreters need to switch. So we'll just pause and let them switch.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just want to add this very quick point. I think Dr. Shafiq has really put his finger on it, but as we told the mayor and the county executive, this report is really put together in an interesting way, and you have to essentially read it backwards. Everything emanates from the working group recommendations, and those are at the rear because they are very lengthy. They constitute about two-thirds of the content of this report. And people want to know what you recommended. So that's why we put that up front. But it's you who are informing the public about this and who are trying to interpret various provisions of this report. You understand that if you read those working group recommendations, they clearly articulate these various issues, but they're repeated several times. So that's why we have this section we call cross-cutting themes, to bring it all together, to show the redundancy. And the redundancy is very important because it's saying it's happening in more than one system. And then the specific recommendations about how do we cure. So I just wanted to state that because I think that Dr. Shafiq has really opened this up to the way that it needs to be read and to be understood.
Great, thank you. So we'll go ahead and open up to questions at this time. I'll start with Dan Gross from Channel 8 News. Dan, you can unmute. Channel 8, you'd need to unmute. Okay.
Well, we never were created to replace any group. And our mapping, that is its primary function. And you will see that we constantly refer to the work of our mapping, and it still exists. So the issue of poverty is reinforced by racism. And I think that's where we come into this play. If you are really going to talk about ending poverty, and there's a whole working group on job creation. There's a working group on business development. What we're saying is that whatever constraints have been placed to prevent people of color from fully participating in not only having a job, but owning businesses which can create jobs in their communities, then those constraints have to be removed. So that's how I believe our work overlays and reinforces the ongoing work of the anti-poverty initiative that is a separate but a collegial and collaborative partner of ours.
Okay, thank you. We'll go now to Gino from City Newspaper. Gino, you can unmute.
Thank you. So first I wanted to start with,
it seems this thing was put together as a way of addressing some of the issues surrounding first following George Floyd, and then we look at Daniel Prude. What specific recommendations are in the report that you could outline that would attempt to prevent things like Daniel Prude or like Tyshawn Jones from happening again?
You know, Gino, should I go ahead, Mayor, or
Yes,
you want
go
to go
ahead. Yes.
first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, you know, if you look into the report, there are quite a few. It's not only fit 24 hours fit service. You know, the mental health has recommended something very important, which I said also, two things, community health care and also local skilled experts in each part of the city, which can diagnose where the problem is and see those who are distressed. This is the word they use, distressed. And to make sure that they are, before anything happens, they get proper treatment and they are given attention to it. There are other areas also that how they have recommended those areas. So it's not only fit service, I think the county is taking care of that, but there is quite a bit that you can look. The community health care as well as the skilled mentors. These are two important actions. I think it can happen not with a lot of investment, but it can happen easily. It just needs networking, interconnectedness, which I emphasize.
And you know, it needs restructuring. The way the services are currently delivered, both policing and mental health, are inadequate, insufficient. There's a question about resources. How much of them do you need? I mean, and this is an ongoing discussion in the community. The county just made an announcement yesterday about increasing staffing resources. The city is training. But the one issue that everybody is not looking at is the fact of the matter that policing services are required. Now, how much and to what degree is an ongoing debate in this community. And whether or not, and I believe this from my 12 years as serving as mayor, there were a lot of ways we could have delivered the exact same services that the police department was delivering in a much more cost-effective way and in a less burdensome way. We have police doing a lot of things that other workers can do, writing tickets, providing security for special events where we didn't have much of that in the past year. But when you look in that budget, that's a multi-million-dollar function of police overtime. So then we talk about how to go in and examine that training. We were essentially blocked from looking at the curriculum of the Criminal Justice Training Institute. That needs to be re-examined, particularly when you hear the defense being offered so often. We responded according to our training. Well, what is that training? What is that training? And people are saying, well, if that's the way you're trained, that's not appropriate, okay? And the third thing that we're saying, as Dr. Shafiq just made, is to include more community people in the way these services are designed and the way they are delivered, which includes having a civilian component in both the mental health and the policing aspect. So I think that there are some pretty strong recommendations here. And the key for us is to say to the mayor and the county executive, you have this report, all right? People can debate endlessly. Should we have said it this way? Should we have included this? Should we have not said this? That's not really the issue. The issue is you got to start someplace. And these can be perfected, but only through practice. You got to try it first. Find out if it works. If it doesn't, what more do we bring to it? So I feel very strongly about this as a roadmap for a better community if these recommendations are not only implemented, but if the community becomes a part of that design and implementation phase.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to Patty Singer from the Minority Reporter.
Hello, thank you. curious about whether there are priorities to some of the things that have been set up. Are the priorities to tackle things in what order? And if so, I mean, how do you coordinate this effort for a change so it doesn't become just this free-for-all and people just start picking places and there doesn't seem to be an order and we go kind of scattershot?
You want to take that one, Arlene?
Sure, I'd be happy to take it. You know, some of our, if you look at the recommendations, obviously we have a list of recommendations in the document that are prioritized in and of themselves. So as both Mayor Johnson and Dr. Shafiq referenced earlier, the work and the way it was created was primarily based on the work from the working groups that fed up into the prioritized recommendations. In terms of what actually gets implemented first, that we have to rely a lot on the city and the county, as well as on the ongoing efforts as we move forward. As both Mayor Johnson and Dr. Shafiq referenced earlier, that's the phase we're in now, right? Let's work to identify who's going to move that work forward, how they're going to do it, and let's go ahead to implement. And really, that's the focus of the work going forward. But the document is prioritized in terms of the recommendations, but we're also being realistic. We know that there are some in there that probably both the city and the county can say, yep, those are easy changes that we can make, even if there's a lot of work behind them, and that they will grab onto those and implement them as soon as possible. I don't know, Bill or Mohammed, if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, I will say, Patty, and to the others, I direct your attention to pages 67 and 68, which is what we consider to be a well-articulated implementation strategy. We've already had discussions with both principals about this, and it says very clearly, first they need to take this report, and I understand the city has already started this process of asking their senior managers to look at this report, find those areas which they oversee and which they're responsible for, and to begin to construct a plan of action, all right? So the first thing they need to do is to look at this report and find out, I don't like to use the term low-hanging fruit, but there are some very easy opportunities, as Dr. Shafiq and Arlene have said. Don't require a lot of money, just require a set of redirections. Find those first. Secondly, they need to identify those things which need to be, which will require resources. And they need to develop ways. I'm not going to read it for you. I ask you to look at those points, but where we are saying to the mayor and the county executive, the ball is in their court. You know, these reports are all times commissioned by government officials. They ask people to spend time. The people spend time. The report comes back and is soon forgotten. Well, in the first place, our RASE people are not going to let this be forgotten. We're going to sit there as a conscience and as a force saying what's happening. They need to set up a schedule of reporting back to the community as to the progress. And here's the last and the most important things. Some of these are going to require both state and federal actions. They are not under the control of either the city or the county. And these problems are being felt in other communities. So we think that they should organize a kind of a lobbying task force of other municipalities. The civil service recommendations come to mind very quickly because civil service is a function that is directed and controlled by the state. And every city has a problem with how archaic the civil service rules are. So we think that they should actually now do a lot of different things at the same time. But first and foremost, demonstrate to this community that they take this report seriously. And the way they do it is to lay out the next and important steps of implementation. Those are transparent, they are public, and there will be measures to say, how are we meeting these objectives? We suggest either quarterly or semi-annually, there needs to be a report back to the community as to which and how many of these items have been addressed and are being addressed.
As a follow-up to that, the report is massive. It's many sections, and you've mentioned a couple times that it's up to the community to implement this. how do you suggest that people who see this report read it, make it manageable for themselves to feel that they can continue to contribute to this effort and not have 200, as you said, 300 pages and just go, oh my gosh, it's too big to succeed in a sense and give up on it? How would you recommend that the public go into this report and get things out of it so that they can help the community?
Well, if that's directed to me, I'll say very quickly, they need to find, the public has their own areas of interest. There are constituencies for each of these 9 areas. And those constituent groups need to really look at this and say, how do we use our collective force, might, our presence to ensure that action is taken? Again, this is going to require, but not a lot of thought, but it's going to require some really constructive action. And I think that I know that both the city and county are working on what are their next steps. How do they roll this out to the community? And with what charge do they give the community? But the community also needs to own this. It's not Mayor Warren's report. It's not County Executive Bellows' report. It's not Bill Johnson's, Muhammad Shafiq, Arlene Santiago's report. It belongs to the community, and they need to take ownership of it. And in a way where the action is focused, it's not scattered, it's not dispersed, but focused around this. And I think, Patty, another thing I would make is this: the policing area is, I think, sets an example, is an exemplar for this. There are at least 4 groups that have come out with recommendations about policing and mental health. And if you read those, we're almost all on the same page. Okay, there's very little variance. We are almost emphasizing these critical areas that need to be addressed. So if the other areas of education, job creation, minority business development, things like that, if they could actually follow that pattern, I don't think you'll see a lot of wild and disparate activity. I think people will go to where the action is and put their collective force behind those points.
Petty, just one thing to add what the mayor said, Mayor Bill Johnson. It is a community report. I think you know that it represents the will of the Monroe County and city of Rochester. If you know, there were 21 commissioners and there were 150 more people, highly skilled, educated, who contributed to this. And then these 9 groups with these 21 commissioners, 150 more people went to the community, dialogued with the community. And that is what the report is coming. It is the hard work of about 200 people from the Monroe County and the city of Rochester, along with a very highly talented staff, interns, and others. So it's a collective work. I think the county and the city have to take some action, has to implement it. So there has been voices how to prioritize, how to start working on this, because this is something significant. This report cannot be ignored because it is not of a few individual report. It is the will of the Monroe County and city of Rochester, how this report has come into being.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Patty. We'll go now to 13 WAM News. You can unmute. Anyone from 13 WAM News? Okay, we'll move forward to Randy Gorbman.
I think I'm all set, Candace, but thank you.
Okay. Brian Sharp from DNC.
Thank you. A bit of a, I guess, similar strain is what Patty talked about. There's obviously a number of issues in here, particularly affecting our children. And I was wondering, when it comes to the report, what you would suggest as what are some of those low-hanging fruit things where people can see immediate impact, meaningful impact, particularly for children. The juvenile justice numbers are some that particularly seem striking. where we'll see something happen, and this isn't, you know, if you've referenced, Mayor, another report to be put on a shelf.
Yeah. Well, the whole human service area, I think they address areas of family. This whole question of policies that have actually had an adverse impact on families need to be examined. The criminal justice system, when we see data that says that an overwhelming number of arrests are misdemeanor arrests and that people's lives are affected, that means some adult who has responsibility for supporting a family is being taken out of that loop. I think that people need to understand the consequences of these actions, and does the punishment fit the crime? These are very, I think when you look at them separately, people can be advocates for juvenile justice, but when you say, well, the same issues that are affecting juveniles who are a part of this system are affecting young people who are part of the education system. This whole question about how we educate children and what are we doing when we segregate children according to geography, and that geography is also undergirded by economic deprivation. These are just these kinds of questions that say, if we began to go in and closely examine and look at them in a systemic way, all right? I think at one point in the report, we talk about the distinction between individual acts of racism, implicit acts of racism, and systemic acts. And it is the systems that really are the most devastating, because this is where people get trapped and they really don't have any way out of being trapped until somebody really shines a light on a practice. And I'm not going to cite examples, but you know, things come to mind like communities whose entire budgets or the majority of their budgets are based on fines and fees. And who are paying those fines and fees? The people who can least afford it, all right? So I think we really have to go back and examine these systems and to say they are not equitably designed. They have therefore inequitable results, disparate results, and we can't tolerate that any longer. And I believe that when you get into that level of discussion, and I know that there are people who would want us to say we need to really brand people, put the big R on their foreheads, call them, label them for who they are. I prefer to look at it in a different way. I prefer to say, just try to explain and rationalize what is now in front of your eyes that you haven't really looked at before. And if you can't justify it, then you've got to change it.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Now we'll go to George Radney with the challenger.
Yes, good morning, everyone. The question, I'm just picking up from what Brian asked, how does this get implemented? Seems like here in Rochester, we have these committees that do all this work, but we never see the fruit of the works getting implemented into the community. And in part two of it, how do you implement and gain other groups in the community, especially groups like Howard Eagle? I noticed I've been seeing his group seems to be interested in what you're doing. How do you get other groups involved to work with you once you get this, get it done? How do we implement the program throughout the community?
If Arlene or Dr. Sheik want to answer that first, I do have an answer for you, George, but I'll see if they want to answer it first.
Okay.
You know, George, this is Shafiq. It's a very good point. You know, the first thing is that the co-chairs and the commissioners and all those who have worked for this report have said to the county executive and the city mayor that we would like to have a group. I mean, that the co-chairs are not going anywhere. We would like to see how it is implemented, but we would like to have a group of skilled people that diagnose the priorities and how it should be implemented. So in other words, we are not going to go away, but rather we want to see that this step by step this is recommended. Second thing is that, whenever you do something, there are people always have reservation. I think this reservation will go away once the steps are taken for implementation, and certainly the reach out would happen. I think we have on Friday a discussion with ROC, other groups, things like that. Slowly and gradually, we will build that consensus that people will see the fruit, the importance of this report.
Okay.
Yeah, George, I would respond in two quick ways. At the beginning, there was intense interest in this commission, and there are a lot of people who wanted to serve on it, couldn't serve on it just because it wasn't, because of the size of it. We had almost 20 times as many people apply for this commission as could serve on it. So there were a lot of disappointed people. But what we said right from the beginning is, just because you're not a commissioner doesn't mean you can't participate. And a number of the people who did apply came back and worked with the working groups. Some chose not to do that. That was their right. But now we're at a different phase. We're at a different phase now. And I would probably liken it to this, George, and I don't think this is a perfect analogy, but let's say somebody's going to build a new building, all right? And there are very few people that are engaged in the designing of that building. The architects, the engineers, a small team of people set out and say, it needs to include this, it needs to include that. And then the building's got to be built. It's got to go from the renderings on paper to an actual physical facility. And look at all of the various people that you have to bring to make that building come to reality. Plumbers, electricians, carpenters, bricklayers, whatever. It takes a lot of people to take that design from design to actual construction. That's where we are now. So I think that all of the people who genuinely care about the inequities, the racial inequities, the structural inequities that exist in this community are now presented an opportunity to come in and help design a different system. And I don't think anybody's going to be excluded from that process. And for us, I don't want to be the architect and the builder, but I don't want to walk away from it either. I believe when the mayor asked me in particular to serve on this commission, she knew my frustrations because in my career, I served on a lot of these commissions. And it has really just bugged me, George, to spend weeks, months, and sometimes years working on something, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens. It just as though we never spent a minute on it. And I said to the mayor, by asking me to be a part of this, I'm not gonna be a part of a sham process. I am not going to be part of a sham process, not at this stage of my life. And she appointed me with that understanding that I was going to be an agitator. I was going to we were going to work, but once we finished our work, we were not going to let it go. And I think that's what we're saying. And if you talk to these 21 commissioners, they don't want to be the ones who implement it, but they want to be the ones to make sure that it gets implemented. That's what we're talking about.
All right. Hopefully, hey, my fingers crossed. Hopefully this will get done.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George.
Thank you. And Dr. Shafiq, did you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, if there is any question, then I want to say something, but if there's any question coming from the media.
Yep, we have one more, WHEC. If there's anyone there from WHEC that would like to ask a question, you can unmute now. Okay, all right, not hearing any. Dr. Shafiq.
Yeah, I have request to make to media. Many years ago, we were addressing a press conference, the religious leaders of Rochester are the interfaith religious leaders. And at the end, I requested the media, please, for God's sake, don't use the word Islamic terrorism. You are hurting each and every individual Muslim. The media has responsibility. Today, our country is suffering. There is that gap which you see, there is a racial gap, there is ethnicity gap. It's a suffering tremendously. And the media has never responded when we use words, the language which is used for Latinos, for Asians, for African Americans, for others people. And even if I don't like the word white supremacy, I think language means when you use a general language about something, it hurts the whole community. I think we need to diagnose ourselves, and the media needs to respond. To bridge the gap, we have to be very clearly responding any language which is used to separate people, to dehumanize people. The media has not done that work. I see the media is quiet whenever there is something like that happening. I didn't see media talking about it. What would be its impact as a whole on the health of our our country overall? So you see this problem today, it is because we did not do the job well. How to bridge the gap? I think we need to do it together. We are one humanity, beyond color, beyond ethnicity, beyond any race or something. We are, which the Bible and the Quran speaks to it. We are created in the image of our Creator. We all are sort of semi-divine, which I say in my classes. We need to respect. And how to do that? We need to stand against any language which could separate us.
Hey, Dr. Shafiq. And I see Tanner from 13 WAM News came in. Tanner, did you have a question? You can unmute.
I still reviewing the report. I just wanted to join to catch anything I might have missed.
Okay.
Candace, I saw that Brian Sharp wanted to ask another question.
Yep, Brian, I saw you put it up and then retracted. Did you want to ask the question?
The floor. I was wondering, Mayor, if you could talk a little bit more about, you had said, for instance, that you were blocked from assessing training from the Criminal Justice Training Institute. And I saw in various other parts that folks just weren't collecting the data that was needed to truly track impact or what was being done. I was wondering if you could assess a little bit about just the ability you had in either access or what was being done to get into or assess where we are now, or how limited that was at this point.
Yeah, Brian. We were not an investigative body. We were not given subpoena power. So we had to rely upon the full cooperation of the parties. And some people chose, we were told in particular when we wanted to see that curriculum of the police curriculum, that we had to foil it. Well, you can speak directly to how long that process takes. And we didn't have the time. We wanted to visit, and I think there was a visit, but there was a lot of information that just wasn't readily made available to us. We think now moving into this next phase, the city and the county contribute significant amount of money to that training institute. So what we're saying is that there are elements of that curriculum that we surmise based on, we have people like Wayne Harris, a retired police administrator. He knows something about that curriculum, but we still didn't have access to it. So I think in the next phase, we're saying the curriculum needs to be designed, how you go about getting that information, how you go about publicizing that information. It has to be determined, but there has to be. And we say that the people who are being impacted by the people who are being trained need to have a role in commenting and reviewing that curriculum. They may not be curriculum experts, but they can really say, for example, that the way the training is interpreted is adverse to their interests. And I can see this kind of dialogue. I think we are in a very unusual and unique time where the normal defenses, you can't have access to this, no comment, foil. I don't think those apply any longer. I think now people are beginning to insist that these are public dollars funding public services. And therefore, there needs to be public input into how these are reviewed, revised, and upgraded. So I don't think that kind of resistance that we encountered should be encountered in this next phase.
Thank you for that question, Brian. And our final question is from Patty Singer. Patty?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Shafiq. I'd like to follow up on what you said about the language. I guess I'm not clear on what you're saying is as far as that affecting language that we use to report on this report. Could you be specific to the instances of the time for action report of what you mean, please?
Actually, this was, I was talking in general about use of language which separates people, which separates family, which divide nations. I think we all see today what is happening to our country. And it is happening because the language, the way it was used, and the media never responded. I mentioned that to you, that how Latinos were mentioned from the highest authorities actually and others, and how Asians were mentioned, how the brown color as a whole, and especially Muslims were mentioned, and others. We need to be very careful. If we see something wrong is happening, we need to address that in a way that only we address that issue, not using a language which can dehumanize a group of people as a whole, or a community as a whole. I think you know it very well, what has happened in the last few years in our country, and how our country is divided, and how that is impacting even our Congress today. We cannot sit together today. So how we can break the gap, that's in general. Actually, this report, what is happening in our country and what happened in Rochester, is because of the language, the way it was used against others. And certainly the workforce, they see that and they are impacted by that. And you can see, if we use a language which is really a language of respect, of bridge building, you will not see these things happening the way it is happening now.
Okay, so you're speaking then in general terms, not just specific to the reporting of this report.
No, it's a general, and
Yeah,
it is, it's actually also for future. I'm really worried about the state of our nation, our country, and the divide, the way it is increasing.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Johnson, I saw you
No,
move
I'm fine.
forward.
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. As was stated, this will not be the only time to speak with the chairs or commissioners. The report will be distributed widely throughout the community. We hope you read it, dig into it, pull out the recommendations, and continue to have more dialogue around it. So I thank you all for joining us this morning, and look forward to continued community conversation around this report.